The most dangerous thing a woman can lose is not her marriage, her mansion, or her last name, but the right to tell the world who she really is. On a cold Thursday night in Manhattan, while rain slid down the glass walls of a quiet apartment overlooking the East River, Naomi Bennett Caldwell sat alone in the dark and watched another woman borrow her pain on national television. The screen glowed blue across her deep brown skin, catching the sharp line of her cheekbones, the stillness of her mouth, and the wedding ring turning slowly between her fingers. Across America, millions of viewers were watching the Vanessa Whitmore special, a primetime interview polished with soft lighting, white orchids, and the kind of sympathy money could arrange. Vanessa sat in an ivory suit, graceful and composed, her blonde hair falling like silk over one shoulder. Beside her sat Ethan Caldwell, Naomi's billionaire husband, heir to one of the largest media empires in the country, a white man whose face had once softened whenever Naomi entered a room. Tonight, his face was calm in the way boardrooms were calm before someone lost everything. The host leaned forward and asked, gently, carefully, as if touching a wound, "Vanessa, many people are wondering why Naomi Caldwell has not spoken publicly." Vanessa lowered her eyes. The pause was perfect, practiced. Then she looked into the camera with a tenderness that did not belong to her and said, "Naomi isn't ready to speak, so I'll speak for her." The ring stopped moving in Naomi's hand. For 8 years, she had stood beside Ethan at charity galas, hospital openings, scholarship dinners, and press conferences where cameras loved the contrast between his old money polish and her quiet, brilliant strength. She had built the Caldwell Foundation from a tax-friendly idea into something that fed children, funded schools, and gave mothers in forgotten neighborhoods a door back into dignity. But now, on the same network her husband owned, his mistress was explaining her silence as if silence meant weakness, as if absence meant guilt, as if a woman could be erased simply because a better-lit version of the truth had been placed in front of a camera. Ethan did not interrupt. He did not correct the lie. He simply folded his hands and let Vanessa continue. "She has been emotionally overwhelmed," Vanessa said softly. "Ethan has tried to protect her." Naomi's reflection stared back from the dark window behind the television, elegant, wounded, unblinking. Then, without a tear, without a sound, she reached for the remote and turned off the screen. The apartment fell into darkness. Only the city remained, glittering like witnesses. Naomi placed the ring on the coffee table, opened the small black box beneath it, and removed a silver flash drive labeled in her own handwriting, "The Truth." Her voice was not gone. It had only been waiting. 8 years before the blue light of that television turned her living room into a courtroom, Naomi Bennett was not Mrs. Caldwell, not a headline, not the graceful woman society photographers loved to frame beside a billionaire husband. She was Naomi from West Baltimore, the daughter of a school librarian and a bus mechanic, raised in a brick row house where every dollar had a purpose and every Sunday dinner came with a lesson about dignity. Her mother, Lorraine Bennett, had taught her that a woman did not need a crown to carry herself like royalty. Her father, Samuel, had taught her that truth was not loud, but it had weight. Naomi carried both lessons into adulthood like heirlooms no thief could steal. By 29, she had become one of the sharpest investigative journalists in New York, known for walking into polished offices and asking questions that made powerful men adjust their ties. She was not reckless. She was precise. She listened before she spoke, watched before she moved, and wrote every sentence as if someone voiceless might one day breathe through it. That was the woman Ethan Caldwell met at the Metropolitan Civic Honors Gala, beneath a ceiling dripping with crystal light and old money confidence. He arrived surrounded by donors, attorneys, and executives who laughed before he finished speaking because wealth often taught people when to smile. He was 36, tall, white, immaculate in a black tuxedo, heir to Caldwell Media Group, and already rich enough to have buildings named after his family. Naomi did not know him personally, but she knew his company. She knew its scandals, its influence, its polished apologies. When a senator praised Ethan on stage as a man changing American media, Naomi noticed Ethan lower his eyes for half a second, almost as if the compliment did not fit comfortably. Later, by the scholarship display, he approached her with 2 glasses of sparkling water instead of champagne. "You are the only person here who looks unimpressed," he said. Naomi accepted the glass, not the charm. I am impressed by results, not lighting. For a moment, Ethan stared at her, then laughed softly, not because he had won, but because she had not let him. That surprised him. Most people leaned toward his name like flowers toward sunlight. Naomi stood straight. They spoke for 12 minutes beside a wall of donor portraits. And in that short time, she challenged his foundation reports, questioned his newsroom ethics, and corrected his lazy use of the word underserved. Ethan should have walked away offended. Instead, he found himself listening. There was no performance in her voice, no hunger for his approval. Only clarity, only fire under control. When Naomi left the gala just before midnight, walking into the cold New York air with her thrifted black coat buttoned to the collar, Ethan watched from the marble steps and understood something that would later both save and ruin him. She was not impressed by power, and that made him want to become worthy of it. In the months after the gala, Ethan Caldwell began appearing in places Naomi had never expected to see him. At first, it was a public forum on newsroom accountability in Brooklyn, where he sat in the third row without cameras, taking notes while Naomi spoke about the danger of letting wealthy men decide which stories deserved mercy. Then it was a community library fundraiser in Baltimore, where he arrived without his usual circle and listened as Naomi introduced him to her mother, Lorraine, who measured him with one calm glance and offered him sweet tea instead of approval. Ethan did not win Naomi quickly. He had to learn the pace of a woman who had spent her life protecting her name from rooms that underestimated her. He sent books instead of roses, corrected policies instead of making promises, and once, after Naomi criticized a Caldwell media segment for turning poverty into entertainment, he quietly pulled the entire feature and funded a journalism fellowship in the neighborhood it had misrepresented. That was the first time Naomi looked at him as more than a powerful man trying to polish his conscience. 1 year later, under the pale spring light of a small chapel outside Washington, District of Columbia, Naomi Bennett became Naomi Bennett Caldwell. The wedding was elegant but not excessive. White orchids, soft piano, 200 guests, and a gospel choir Lorraine insisted on hiring because, as she told Ethan, love without soul was just decoration. The photographs traveled everywhere. Magazines called them the new face of American influence. Talk shows called them proof that old money and new purpose could share the same table. Ethan, handsome and composed in his tailored suit, stood beside Naomi as if she had given him access to a better version of himself. Naomi, glowing in a satin gown with her natural curls pinned beneath her veil, looked not conquered by wealth, but entirely herself inside it. For a while, the image was true. Their penthouse on Fifth Avenue became a place of warm dinners, late-night policy debates, and mornings when Ethan read her drafts before sunrise while she corrected his speeches in the margins with a red pen. Naomi rebuilt the Caldwell Foundation from a tax shelter into a living promise. She moved money into after-school programs, maternal health clinics, college scholarships, and legal aid offices that served families no camera crew had ever followed home. Ethan watched donors soften when Naomi spoke. He watched reporters lean in. He watched board members who once dismissed compassion as bad strategy applaud her like she had invented grace. And slowly, dangerously, he began to confuse her gift with his brand. America did not simply love their marriage. America bought into it. Their faces appeared on covers, billboards, annual reports, and televised charity specials where Ethan spoke about vision and Naomi spoke about people. She gave his empire a heartbeat. He gave her a platform. Under the golden lights, it looked like balance. But even then, buried beneath the applause, a quiet imbalance was forming. Ethan owned the cameras. Naomi owned the truth. Only one of them understood the difference. Vanessa Whitmore entered Caldwell Media on a Tuesday morning wrapped in cream cashmere, perfect posture, and a smile that made people feel chosen before they realized they were being studied. She was 32, a former cable news correspondent with a gift for turning soft questions into sharp opportunities, and by noon the executive floor was already speaking her name as if she had been expected all along. Ethan introduced her during the leadership meeting as the new face of Caldwell Prime, a fresh voice for the company's national audience. Naomi sat 3 seats away, wearing a navy dress and pearl earrings Lorraine had given her, watching Vanessa thank the room with polished humility. There was nothing obvious to dislike. That was what made Naomi pay attention. Vanessa did not interrupt. She absorbed. She listened to Ethan's phrases, copied the warmth Naomi used with junior staff, and laughed lightly at jokes that were not funny enough to earn it. When the meeting ended, she crossed the room and took Naomi's hands with both of hers, as if they were already friends. "You are even more beautiful in person," Vanessa said, her blue eyes shining beneath the conference room lights. "And your work with the foundation is extraordinary. I have studied every campaign." Naomi smiled with the grace expected of her. "Then you know the work belongs to the communities, not to me." Vanessa paused just long enough to register the correction, then smiled wider. "That is exactly the kind of thing only you would say." At first, Ethan seemed amused by Vanessa's admiration. He called it professional respect. He said the network needed someone who understood emotional storytelling for Middle America, someone who could sit across from grieving parents, exhausted teachers, and small-town mayors and make them feel safe. Naomi agreed in theory. The right voice could honor a story. The wrong one could decorate it until the truth disappeared. Within 3 months, Vanessa was everywhere. She hosted the education special Naomi had helped design. She moderated the maternal health panel Naomi had spent 6 years building relationships to create. She appeared beside Ethan at a donor dinner in Chicago after Naomi's flight was mysteriously rebooked for the following morning. The photographs arrived before Naomi landed back in New York. Ethan in a midnight suit, Vanessa in silver, their heads tilted toward each other under warm ballroom lights. The caption read, "Ethan Caldwell and Vanessa Whitmore lead a new era of compassionate media." Naomi read the words twice. New era. Not continuation. Not partnership. New. That evening, when she returned to their Fifth Avenue penthouse, Ethan was still awake, standing by the window with his phone glowing in his hand. He looked tired, but not guilty. That distinction chilled her more than anger could have. "Vanessa is very comfortable in my place," Naomi said quietly. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket. It was one event, Naomi. Across the room, the city glittered against the glass like 1,000 cameras waiting to see which woman would blink first. Naomi did not blink. The first erasure did not arrive like betrayal. It arrived like a revised calendar invite. Naomi was in her office at the Caldwell Foundation, reviewing scholarship applications from Detroit, Memphis, and rural Georgia, when her assistant placed a glossy folder on the edge of her desk. "The final materials for the Baltimore initiative," the young woman said carefully, and that one careful word made Naomi look up. Final. The campaign was called Open Doors, a 5-year education program Naomi had built from memory and conviction. It was meant to fund tutoring centers, school libraries, college counseling, and safe after-school spaces in neighborhoods like the one that raised her. She had written the mission statement herself on a rainy night in Baltimore, sitting at her mother's kitchen table while Lorraine made cornbread and reminded her that children did not need pity, they needed tools. Naomi opened the folder expecting to see the familiar photographs, the community partners, the clean white design with blue lettering. Instead, she saw Ethan standing beside Vanessa on the front page. Ethan looked statesmanlike in charcoal gray. Vanessa looked radiant in soft gold. Between them, in bold letters, was the phrase, "A Caldwell Media Initiative." Naomi turned the page slowly. Her name was gone. Not smaller. Not moved to the second page. Gone. So were the names of the local educators who had spent weekends helping her shape the program. So was the quote from Mrs. Ellis, the retired principal who had cried when Naomi promised that the first learning center would open 3 blocks from where her old school had closed. In their place was a polished paragraph about Ethan Caldwell's commitment to changing the future of American education, followed by a personal note from Vanessa about the power of giving children a voice. Naomi read that sentence twice. Giving children a voice. The words sat on the page like stolen jewelry. She closed the folder with such quiet control that her assistant looked more frightened than if Naomi had shouted. "Who approved this version?" Naomi asked. "Communications," the assistant whispered. "In Mr. Caldwell's office." Naomi nodded once. The kind of nod that did not forgive anything. That afternoon, she walked 32 floors up to Ethan's private office without making an appointment. Through the glass wall, she saw Vanessa leaning over his desk, pointing at something on his tablet. Ethan was listening with the focused expression Naomi used to believe belonged to important things. When Naomi entered, Vanessa straightened and touched her necklace, a delicate gold pendant shaped almost exactly like the one Naomi wore in the foundation portrait hanging downstairs. "Naomi," Ethan said, surprised. Not pleased. Surprised. She placed the folder on his desk. "You removed me from my own work." Ethan exhaled like a man managing a difficult meeting. The board wanted a cleaner media strategy. Naomi looked at Vanessa, then back at her husband. Cleaner than the woman who built it. Silence crossed the room in a thin, cold line. Vanessa lowered her eyes, but not before Naomi saw the victory flicker there. Ethan did not reach for her hand. He did not stand. He only said, "This is business." And in that moment, Naomi understood that the theft had already begun. Not of money, not of status, of meaning. That night, the penthouse felt larger than it had ever felt before, not because the rooms had changed, but because every beautiful object inside them suddenly looked borrowed from a life Naomi no longer recognized. The marble floors reflected the city lights in long silver lines. The grand piano Ethan had bought after their second anniversary stood untouched near the windows. On the dining table, a vase of white lilies released their perfume into the quiet air, too clean, too formal, like flowers placed in a hotel lobby instead of a home. Naomi stood at the kitchen island with the open doors folder beside her and waited for the elevator doors to open. She did not rehearse anger. She did not collect tears. She arranged the facts in her mind the way she had once arranged evidence before publishing a story that powerful people hoped would never be told. Ethan came in just after 10:30, his tie loosened, his phone in his hand, his expression already guarded. That hurt more than if he had looked ashamed. A guilty man entered a room carrying weight. Ethan entered carrying strategy. "We need to talk," Naomi said. He set his phone face down on the counter. The gesture was small, but Naomi noticed that he did not turn it off. "If this is about the campaign materials, I already told you what happened." "No," she said, sliding the folder toward him. "You told me what explanation the board approved." Ethan looked toward the windows, where Manhattan glittered 37 floors below them, all those lights shining without warmth. "Naomi, the foundation has grown. The messaging has to be broader now." "Broader," she repeated. "Is that the word for removing the people who made it real?" He exhaled slowly. "You are making this personal." The sentence landed softly, almost politely, and still it split something open inside her. Naomi looked at the man who had once flown to Baltimore with no security team just to sit on her mother's porch and ask how to earn trust. She looked at his custom suit, his careful mouth, his eyes trained by years of negotiations to reveal only what was useful. "It became personal when my name disappeared and Vanessa's voice replaced mine." At the sound of Vanessa's name, something moved across Ethan's face. Not surprise. Protection. Naomi saw it, and the room went colder. "She understands the media landscape," Ethan said. "She knows how to translate the work for a national audience." Naomi gave a small, almost disbelieving smile. "Translate? You mean soften? Brighten? Make it easier for donors to applaud without feeling responsible? That is unfair. Is it?" Silence settled between them, steady and merciless. From somewhere on the counter, Ethan's phone buzzed once. Neither of them moved, but both of them knew whose name might be glowing on the screen. Naomi placed her wedding ring flat against the marble. Not removed forever. Not yet. Just placed between them, a small circle of gold becoming evidence. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Is she speaking for the foundation, or is she speaking for me?" Ethan looked at the ring, then at Naomi, and the pause that followed answered before he did. "This is complicated." Naomi nodded slowly. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to frighten them both. "No, Ethan. It is simple. You liked my voice when it made you look human. Now you prefer hers because it makes you feel innocent." His face tightened, but he said nothing. Not a denial. Not an apology. Nothing. And in that polished, expensive silence, Naomi understood that her husband had not simply failed to defend her. He had chosen the comfort of another woman's version of the truth over the woman who had given him her own. The first public lie arrived on a Sunday evening, wrapped in velvet lighting and soft piano music, as if cruelty could become kindness if it was edited beautifully enough. Naomi did not know it was coming. She had spent the afternoon in Harlem at a community center, meeting with mothers whose children were waiting for the Open Doors tutoring program to begin, and for 3 hours she had felt almost steady again. The rooms were plain, the coffee was weak, and the folding chairs squeaked whenever someone shifted, but there was truth there. No marble. No donors performing compassion for cameras. Just women with tired eyes, careful hope, and children drawing stars on construction paper while grown people talked about the future. Naomi left with a folder full of handwritten requests and a heart that still knew what it was fighting for. Then her phone began to vibrate before she reached the car. First came a message from her assistant, then one from a former producer, then 20 more, each shorter than the last, each carrying the same alarm in different words. Are you watching this? Naomi sat in the back seat as rain tapped lightly against the roof of the Blacktown car and opened the video link. Vanessa Whitmore was on Caldwell Prime, seated in a pale blue studio chair beneath a banner about leadership, healing, and the future of American families. Ethan sat beside her, his posture controlled, his expression grave in the way powerful men looked when they wanted sympathy without confession. The host spoke gently. There has been a lot of public curiosity about Naomi Caldwell's reduced role at the foundation. Is she stepping away? Vanessa lowered her gaze with such delicate sadness that Naomi felt the old journalist inside her go still. It was the stillness that came before recognizing a setup. Naomi has given so much, Vanessa said, her voice quiet and polished. Sometimes strong women carry pain privately. Ethan has been doing everything he can to protect her peace. Protect her peace. Naomi looked out through the rain-blurred window at a red traffic light glowing over Madison Avenue. The words were graceful. That made them more dangerous. Vanessa had not called her unstable. Not yet. She had built a softer cage, one lined with concern, one that made Naomi's absence look fragile instead of forced. The host turned to Ethan. Is that fair to say? Ethan hesitated for less than a second. Then he nodded. It was small. It was almost nothing. But Naomi saw everything inside it. She saw every erased signature, every meeting moved without her, every donor who had stopped calling, every room where Vanessa had smiled while stepping into. Naomi's shadow. A nod could be quieter than a betrayal and still destroy the last bridge home. The car driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, worried by the silence. Naomi locked the phone screen and placed it face down on her lap. Her hands did not shake. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was even. Take me to the office, not home. Outside. The rain softened the city into silver, but inside Naomi something became clear, hard, and unbreakable. If they wanted to turn her silence into a story, then she would start collecting every word they thought she would never use. The Caldwell Foundation offices were almost empty when Naomi arrived, the kind of empty that made expensive buildings sound honest. The security lights glowed along the marble lobby. The elevators hummed behind polished brass doors. 32 floors above the city, the office she had built from borrowed conviction and billionaire funding waited in a silence so complete that her heels sounded like a verdict. Her assistant had gone home. The communications team had left their glass conference room dark. On the wall near reception, the new Open Doors poster watched her approach. Ethan and Vanessa smiling beneath words that had once belonged to mothers in Baltimore, teachers in Detroit, and children whose names no board member had bothered to learn. Naomi stopped in front of it for only a second. Then she walked past. In her office, she turned on one desk lamp and let the rest of the room stay shadowed. The golden pool of light fell over framed photographs, handwritten thank you notes, and the old silver microphone she had used during her first investigative interview at 24. She opened her laptop, connected a small black drive, and began copying files with the patient focus of a woman who understood that truth needed more than pain. It needed dates. It needed signatures. It needed emails, calendar changes, donor notes, revised press releases, board approvals, and every quiet edit that had turned her work into someone else's performance. Folder by folder, the record assembled itself. Communications drafts with her name removed. Memos describing Vanessa as the preferred emotional bridge. A strategy note from Ethan's office suggesting that Naomi's reduced public visibility could be framed as a period of rest. Naomi read that line without blinking. Rest. They had mistaken exile for rest. By midnight, she had filled 2 drives and printed enough documents to make a clean stack beside her bag. She did not take the awards. She did not take the crystal plaque from the governor or the glossy magazine cover where she and Ethan smiled like proof of a better America. She took only what mattered: evidence, her notebooks, the microphone, a photograph of her parents, and the first handwritten mission statement for Open Doors, still carrying a faint coffee ring from Lorraine Bennett's kitchen table. At 2:17 in the morning, Ethan called. His name lit her phone again and again, bright against the dark desk. Naomi watched it until the screen went black. Then she powered the phone off and placed it in the drawer. Some doors did not need to be slammed. Some were closed with a key, a quiet hand, and no witness except the woman leaving. Before dawn, Naomi returned to the penthouse. Ethan was not there. The lilies had begun to wilt, their white petals curling at the edges like paper held too close to heat. She packed one suitcase. Not the designer gowns society pages loved. Not the jewelry Ethan had chosen. She packed simple black trousers, 2 coats, a Bible from her mother, her father's old fountain pen, and a pair of running shoes with worn soles from mornings before wealth had complicated her reflection. On the coffee table, she left her wedding ring beside a note written in steady blue ink. I will not live inside a story I did not write. Then Naomi Bennett Caldwell stepped into the private elevator for the last time, carrying 1 suitcase, 2 flash drives, and the kind of silence powerful people always underestimated. For 3 years, the world believed Naomi Bennett Caldwell had disappeared because Caldwell Media taught it how to believe that. The first articles were gentle enough to sound respectful, quoting unnamed friends who said she needed privacy, balance, and healing. Then came the sharper columns, the ones that called her distant, difficult, and unable to adjust to the pressure of being married to one of America's most visible billionaires. Morning shows discussed her absence over coffee mugs and bright studio smiles. Magazine panels asked why a woman with so much privilege would walk away from influence. Nobody asked who had locked the doors before she left. Nobody asked why her voice had vanished from the foundation she built. Naomi watched it all from Atlanta, where she had rented a small brick townhouse on a quiet street lined with magnolia trees and old porches. She chose Atlanta because it gave her space without asking for confession, warmth without performance, and history deep enough to remind her that silence had never meant surrender. In the mornings, she ran 2 miles through Piedmont Park before the sun became too hot. In the afternoons, she met with attorneys, former producers, nonprofit leaders, teachers, and women who carried stories the public had been trained to misunderstand. At night, she sat at a plain oak desk beneath a single lamp and built the Bennett archive. It began as folders, then recordings, then interviews, then a private digital platform with encrypted files, legal notes, timelines, and testimony from women whose reputations had been softened, twisted, or erased by powerful institutions. A nurse accused of being emotional after reporting unsafe conditions. A school principal blamed for budget failures she had warned about for years. A councilwoman pushed out of office by rumors created in rooms she had never entered. Naomi listened to every one of them the way her father had taught her to fix an engine, patiently, carefully, never assuming the loudest sound revealed the deepest problem. She did not promise revenge. She promised record. That was stronger. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell kept appearing on television beside Vanessa Whitmore. Their chemistry was called elegant. Their partnership was called visionary. Vanessa became the public face of compassion at Caldwell Media, wearing pale suits, lowering her voice at the perfect moments, and speaking about women's empowerment with Naomi's stolen vocabulary polished into something marketable. Ethan looked successful in every frame, but success had begun to sit badly on him. His smiles arrived a second late. His eyes moved toward empty spaces at charity dinners, as if expecting to find Naomi standing there with a correction only she was brave enough to make. On the 3rd anniversary of the night she left, Naomi received an email from a producer at the same studio that had once turned her silence into a spectacle. The subject line was simple: live interview request. Naomi read it once, then again. Outside her window, the Atlanta rain tapped softly against the glass. On her desk sat the silver microphone, 2 flash drives, and the original Open Doors mission statement. For the first time in 3 years, Naomi smiled. Not warmly, not bitterly. Precisely. They had mistaken her absence for an ending. They were about to learn it had been preparation. Naomi returned to New York on a gray Monday morning with one black garment bag, one leather briefcase, and no husband waiting at the airport. LaGuardia smelled of coffee, raincoats, and hurried apologies, the ordinary American music of people going somewhere important. No one recognized her at first. 3 years had changed the shape of her public absence. Her curls were shorter now, sculpted softly around her face. Her posture had become quieter, not smaller, the kind of quiet that made space rearrange itself around her. A studio driver held a sign with her name near baggage claim, and when he saw her, his expression flickered with the startled respect people gave to someone they had expected to look broken. "Miss Bennett?" he asked. Naomi smiled faintly. "Yes." "Not Caldwell." "Not anymore." The ride into Manhattan carried her past glass towers, food carts, wet sidewalks, and the same skyline that had once framed her marriage like a promise. On the producer's final call, she had asked only 3 questions. Would the interview be live? Would Ethan Caldwell and Vanessa Whitmore be present? Would Caldwell Media have editorial control? The producer had hesitated at the 3rd question, then admitted that the network was still owned by Ethan's company, but the program itself had been placed under independent oversight after public pressure and sponsor concerns. Naomi had listened, silent long enough for the woman to grow nervous. Then she said, "I will come if no one cuts my microphone." By noon, every major entertainment site had posted the announcement. Naomi Bennett to speak publicly for the first time in 3 years. Vanessa's team responded within 17 minutes, calling it a healing conversation. Ethan's office released a statement about respect, privacy, and moving forward. Naomi read both from the back seat of the car and placed her phone in her bag. They were still using soft words to build hard walls. At the studio entrance, young assistants moved quickly around her, carrying clipboards and headsets, careful not to stare too long. The hallway smelled faintly of hairspray, warm lights, and expensive carpet cleaner. Naomi remembered it all. This was the building where Vanessa had lowered her eyes and turned concern into a weapon. This was the place where Ethan had nodded away the truth. In the green room, a stylist offered her a rack of jewel-toned dresses selected by the network. Naomi thanked her and unzipped her own garment bag instead. Inside was a black dress, simple, tailored, graceful without asking permission to be seen. She pinned her mother's small gold brooch near the collar, placed the silver microphone on the makeup table, and opened her briefcase. The flash drives rested in a velvet pouch beside a stack of printed emails, timelines, and foundation documents. Across the hall, Vanessa's laugh floated through the door, light and practiced. A moment later, Ethan's voice answered, lower, tense, unmistakably familiar. Naomi looked at her reflection beneath the bright mirror bulbs. The woman staring back was not the wife America had mourned, pitied, or misread. She was the witness. She was the archive. She was the story returning to the room where they thought they had ended it. The studio lights came on with a softness that made every surface look forgiving. But Naomi knew forgiveness was not the same as truth. She walked onto the set to a silence so complete that even the crew seemed to hold its breath. The host, Marissa Grant, stood to greet her with careful warmth, while Ethan rose halfway from the couch, then stopped, as if he no longer knew what courtesy belonged to a woman he had helped erase. Vanessa remained seated for 1 second too long before lifting her chin and offering the kind of smile that had fooled cameras for years. Naomi took the chair across from them, crossed one ankle over the other, and placed her leather briefcase beside her feet. The black dress did not shimmer. It did not beg for attention. It simply held its shape, like Naomi herself. Marissa began gently, because television loved gentleness when it was about to touch something sharp. Naomi, for 3 years, many people have wondered why you stepped away. Are you here tonight to heal old misunderstandings? Naomi looked at Ethan first, then at Vanessa, then into the camera that was feeding her face into living rooms across America. I am here because misunderstanding is what happens when people lack facts. What happened to me was not a misunderstanding. The air shifted. Vanessa's smile thinned. Ethan's hands folded, then unfolded. Marissa leaned forward. Then what was it? Naomi reached into her briefcase and placed her wedding ring on the glass table. The tiny sound it made seemed louder than applause. It was a replacement strategy. Vanessa gave a quiet laugh, smooth as cream poured over broken glass. Naomi, I think that is a very painful way to describe people trying to protect you during a difficult time. Naomi turned to her. No anger, no trembling, just the unbearable calm of a woman who had brought receipts to a room built for performance. You did not protect me, Vanessa. You practiced me. The host froze. Ethan looked up. Naomi opened the folder on her lap. On March 14th, my name was removed from the Open Doors campaign materials. On March 17th, your team circulated a memo calling you the preferred emotional bridge for the foundation. On April 2nd, Ethan's office approved language suggesting my reduced visibility could be framed as rest. She slid copies across the table. The camera moved closer. Vanessa's eyes flashed toward Ethan, fast and frightened. Those are internal documents, Ethan said, his voice low. Naomi nodded. Yes. Internal documents often tell the truth public statements are paid to hide. Marissa swallowed, then asked the question the whole country was leaning toward. Did you leave because of Vanessa? Naomi paused. The studio lights warmed her face, but her voice remained cool and clear. No, I left because my husband allowed another woman to stand in front of a camera and turn my silence into her script. She reached into the velvet pouch and removed the silver flash drive. And tonight, I am correcting the record. The control room stayed live. No one cut her microphone. For the first time in 3 years, America did not hear about Naomi Bennett from someone else. America heard her. The flash drive did not need drama. It needed only a screen, a timestamp, and the quiet patience of evidence. Marissa Grant looked toward the control room, and for one suspended second the entire studio seemed to measure the cost of staying live. Then the monitor behind them changed. An email appeared first, clean and undeniable, carrying Ethan Caldwell's digital approval beneath a communications memo that described Naomi as emotionally unavailable to the public and Vanessa as a more reliable messenger for the foundation's next phase. The audience made no sound, but silence can gasp when enough people understand at once. Vanessa sat perfectly still, her practiced softness draining from her face by degrees. Ethan stared at the screen as if seeing his own signature for the first time. Then came the audio. Ethan's voice filled the studio, calm, businesslike, familiar to shareholders and senators, and the woman who had once believed his quiet meant honor. Let Vanessa handle the narrative. Naomi will not fight this publicly. The words did not shout. They did not need to. They landed with the cold authority of a door locking from the outside. Marissa lowered her notes to her lap. Mr. Caldwell, she said carefully, was your wife aware that her public image was being discussed this way? Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. The empire that had taught him how to shape headlines had not taught him how to answer truth in real time. Vanessa recovered first, because survival had always been part of her talent. I was following the direction of senior leadership, she said, turning slightly away from Ethan. I cared about the foundation. I cared about the work. Naomi looked at her with a sadness so controlled it felt almost merciful. You cared about the microphone. That was the line America remembered. By morning, clips from the interview had crossed every major platform. Sponsors suspended campaigns before breakfast. 2 board members resigned before noon. The Caldwell Foundation's community partners issued a joint statement confirming Naomi's original leadership and requesting an independent audit. At Caldwell Media headquarters, the lobby screens that usually celebrated ratings and stock gains played muted news coverage of Ethan's face under the words media accountability crisis. Vanessa released a carefully worded statement about being misled, then stopped answering calls when former staff members began sharing their own records. Ethan watched it all from his office on the 48th floor, the city spread beneath him like something he had purchased and still could not control. On his desk sat an old photograph from the Baltimore Gala, Naomi in a black coat, smiling at someone outside the frame. He remembered wanting to become worthy of that smile. Somewhere along the way, he had tried to own the light instead. Near sunset, his private elevator opened, and for one impossible second, he hoped Naomi had come. But it was only his attorney, carrying folders, consequences, and the kind of silence money could not negotiate. Ethan looked back at the photograph and understood, at last, that Naomi had not destroyed him on television. She had simply returned the truth to its owner. 2 weeks after the interview, Naomi returned to Atlanta before sunrise, not as a woman running from New York, but as a woman who had finally walked through it without lowering her eyes. The airport windows held a pale wash of morning light, and for the first time in years, her reflection did not look borrowed from someone else's headline. She looked tired, yes, but clean in the spirit, the way a room feels after every curtain has been opened. Outside, a car waited to take her home, yet she stood for a moment near the curb with her coat folded over one arm, letting the warm Georgia air touch her face like a blessing. Her phone had been filled for days with messages from women she had never met, teachers, nurses, mothers, founders, assistants, widows, daughters, all saying different versions of the same thing. I thought silence meant I had lost. Naomi read every message slowly. She answered as many as she could, not with speeches, with sentences. You are still here. Your record matters. Do not let anyone narrate your dignity for you. Ethan called once that evening, then again the next morning. On the third day, he sent a handwritten letter to the townhouse, the kind of letter a man writes when lawyers can no longer translate regret into strategy. Naomi opened it at her kitchen table, beside a cup of coffee and the old mission statement from Baltimore. Ethan wrote about shame, about arrogance, about the terrible ease of allowing a lie to continue because correcting it would cost him comfort. He wrote that he missed her voice in every room. Naomi read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. Some apologies deserved to be received. Not all of them deserved a door back in. 1 month later, the Bennett Archive opened its first studio in a renovated brick building on Auburn Avenue, with tall windows, warm wood floors, and a small sign by the entrance that read, "Truth has a home here." There were no crystal chandeliers, no donor portraits, no billionaire name carved into marble. There were microphones, legal resources, counseling referrals, and a long table where women could sit, breathe, and place their stories down without fear of having them rewritten. On the first recording day, Naomi wore a white blouse, black trousers, and her mother's gold brooch. The silver microphone rested before her like an old friend. When the red recording light came on, she did not think of Vanessa. She did not think of the penthouse, the ring, or the studio where the country had watched the truth return. She thought of her father's hands stained with engine oil, her mother's voice over Sunday dinner, and every woman who had ever been called difficult for refusing to disappear. Naomi looked into the camera, steady and unafraid. "A woman's silence is not permission," she said. "Sometimes it is preparation." Outside, morning sunlight spread across Atlanta in gold ribbons, touching the sidewalk, the windows, the faces of people walking toward their own unfinished lives. Naomi smiled, not because everything had been repaired, but because she was no longer waiting for repair to look like a man returning. Her name was her own again. Her voice was her own again. And this time, when the world leaned in to listen, no one else was holding the microphone.